prejudicial way. And that impacted health. Life expectancies were shorter for African Americans at that time as they still are today. Birth rates were disproportionate as they still are today. And if you look at the Centers for Disease Control or the National Health or Mental Health Institution, you are strong to see that all chronic illnesses, all diseases for African American population being 12% is still very disproportionate. Everything from heart attacks to diabetes to high blood pressure, hypertension. And so something is going on within the culture in health and wellness that still is a causal factor that's related to that. Now, I used to sit at the foot of Dr. Frances Cress Welsing in Washington, D.C. while I was working on my doctorate degree. And she would indicate this covert type of racism that in everyday life we would have to experience. And that was a stressor that would be a causal factor that could be related to some of the illnesses that permeated itself with this disproportionate amount of illnesses for African Americans. So we have to understand this as something that is true. It's a phenomenon that exists, and in understanding it, we might then be able to overcome it a little bit better, because it can bring some invisible, beneath the surface type of stressors in our life that could cause and have an impact on our health. And this,
are you saying that in the kind of violence that we might find among in the African American community, not only dealing with police brutality, but personal violence one toward another.
Yes.
Do you think that this has anything to do with what you call those stressors or whatever? Is there any kind of connection that sociologists have made in reference to this?
Yes, absolutely. This is a very interesting question that you pose. Dr. Leary and others, we referred to this notion of post-traumatic slave syndrome. That was one of the things I wanted to come back to do part two. And this post-traumatic slave syndrome is connected back from slavery to the present. To say that how did all of that be passed down from one generation to the next generation to the next generation, even to the present, that might impact us in a way that we don't really feel that is impacting us, but it does. And that has very strong health-related issues within our community. It's not only that the dominant group see a particular subordinate group in a certain way, but that subordinate group might, say for instance, African Americans and other ethnic groups, might start seeing themselves in the way that the dominant group sees them in this very prejudiced way. And sociologists call it a self-fulfilling prophecy. We start thinking that that is a reality, while indeed it's not, but if you think it is and you act that way, then it has an impact. And that impact could be shown in health. And while we have so many issues related to high blood pressure, hypertension that might lead to heart attacks or diabetes or some of the other chronic illnesses. So she sees that very strongly within relationships. Now, one of the examples for the viewing audience to understand this, if you think about a group of people who've been trained in an institution of the military to do a tour abroad and in war. And when they come back, they might have post-traumatic stress from that short time that they are there. So we in sociology look at this notion of being enslaved for 244 years. Now this first group went over there for a month, 2 months, 3 months, 6 months, a year, and then come back, and they feel like it was so decrepit that they still have some types of symptoms for something that they left, and now they are back home.
What about the 200 years?
That's right. What about these 244 years, then 81 years of that, and then laws that said to a person that they are this way? Now, how does that not filter into their psyche? This is what Dr. Frances Cress Welsing would try to indicate, as well as other psychiatrists and psychologists and social psychologists, sociologists, that this definitely has an impact on our mental health, and that mental health would then filter down to our physical health, and it has that type of an impact. But it's something that in many instances in everyday life we may not realize is there, but is actually in the very fabric of social structure.
Invisible killers.
Invisible killers.
In other words, these things are some of the things that are built in and psychologically a part of us, and a part of society, but we never can put our finger on it as having that impact, and we always look for something, some other kind of outside reason, without understanding that there might be a mental kind of connection to that. Is that what we're saying?
That's exactly what we're saying. That's an excellent analysis of it. And we can see ramifications of this every day. Well, let's look at our President of the United States for an example. He's gone through his social structure. He's done everything in a very positive way, very competent. He's met all the demands of a Harvard and of getting a law degree from there and being the President of the United States. And then people, for whatever the reason, don't support certain policies and things. So this has to be a stressor for him. And you might ask yourself, well, why? Because he might say, well, Ronald Reagan had the same one that I'm proposing, and the same group would not support someone that I'm supporting that did it earlier. So what's the problem? And so is this type of thing that's exists?
Yeah, that caused a real problem in terms of the mental attitudes and the mental outlook.
Absolutely.
And especially those individuals who might not be aware of that, you see. And so I think that that's very, very important. I think that that's a point of view that we ought to try to get across. And what we're going to do, we're going to take this second commercial break, and we'll be back with our audience following this very, very short commercial break.
This next segment, just to say that and then put it right into the incarceration or whatever else you want to do.
Sounds good.
Is this the last segment?
This
thing went fast,
didn't it? Yeah, this is 10-minute segment.
Yeah,
that's excellent information. Yeah, I appreciate it.
No, I know sometimes so many things just go on. You know, we can talk about this, but you can see how through civil rights now with the whole bathroom issue. See, they feel that's just fitting right into this conversation.
That is segregation.
Yeah, that's right.
And that's where the whole issue started. In terms of separating restrooms.
Separation. Yeah.
Are you familiar with The Help, the book The Help? My wife.
The Help. Yes. I bring that. That's right.
Yeah. Well, why don't you bring that in?
Okay.
This idea of different separate bathrooms. And where did it come from?
A
lot of folks think this might be a LBG kind of situation.
It
started earlier with race.
That's right. It did. Yeah. I wanted to bring that. I was thinking about that. I mean, from one time to the next, all this comes up.
That's right.
And that group of people feel like they're being discriminated against too.
Okay, but talk about that.
That'd be great.
These restrooms.
Yes.
That's very important. Because I know I've been subjected to it. Born in the South.
That's right.
Going and see segregation on one side. I mean, colors and whites and X. Why can't we all go to the restroom?
That's right. Yeah, we human. Everybody doing the same thing. You do a couple things and then wash your hands.
That's right.
You might want to comb. All right.
Very good. Thank you and welcome back. Separation of these restrooms. Okay. That's good. Thank you and welcome back to the final segment of the show for today. We're talking to Dr. EKSanford from Tennessee State University, and he's giving us some information in reference to the status of race in America, Part 2. Doctor, let's see if we can pick up where we left off in terms of some of the psychological impact that race has in reference to that and at your selection.
Okay, well, absolutely, and it does. It impacts us, and I would go as far as saying disproportionately, because it's indifferent, discriminatory type of treatment that a person might have to experience, and as a result of that, it can have a both mental and physical impact on a particular individual. Now, back at the time of President Bill Clinton, he commissioned a conference on race. And at the last part one segment, I was trying to remember Dr. John Hope Franklin, the noted scholar that he let head up that commission. And in that, he had one of my previous professors when I was at Howard, Dr. James Jones, and other professors, Dr. Jack DeVideo and Dr. Sue, who were noted scholars in the area of race at the time. And they wanted to go throughout the United States on these several occasions and have these discussions. And the whole aim of it was to increase knowledge to try to change attitudes and behaviors within America to improve race relations.
These are the same ideas of the town hall meetings that we see that are going on now. Would that be on that?
That's the same type of phenomenon. And he felt that if this happened, that maybe we would have this dialogue, because one of the problems in America is that it's been silenced. That whole thing that we bring up about hundreds of years of slavery and Jim Crow laws, we don't have a true conversation about it. And this, I think, is one of the aims of us having this conversation today, because if you can't talk about it in a truthful way, if you hide it, then you're going to always have the stereotypes, the prejudice treatments that are still present. So after they had that commission with that aim to try to improve conditions, because conditions were by law set in segregation. Coming out of the Reconstruction area, 1896 with Plessy versus Ferguson, made everything separate. It was supposed to have been equal, but it was totally separate and unequal. So viewers looking at us on television say we're two prime examples of people that grew up in a segregated America, and by law things were segregated. And and many viewers might look and say, well, that was back then and this is now. I can go wherever I want to. But when you think about what is going on very topical right now in our nation, throughout the country, is about gay brothers, lesbian sisters, and other transvestites making the issue and the argument of being segregated from being able to go to the bathroom that in their minds they think that they should go to. And this is it's become in social structure a part of the law, a civil rights type of an issue that others had to fight for earlier. So you've seen through economics that many companies are pulling out of certain areas. I happen to be from North Carolina. Here in this state of Tennessee, they've kind of put it on the board so they can hold it until another time, because you're talking about millions of dollars that will be taken away if this legislature does not vote in a certain way. The same type of fight that African Americans had to be able to go into certain places, this issue is going on in the same way. No different than the marriage issue between gay brothers, lesbian sisters, to be able to have that civil right was a national issue. And by law, the government and the law had to deal with it. You're hearing presidential candidates, those on the good side of it, are talking about it, others are putting it on the rug again. But Dr. James Jones and Dr. Sue and this commission felt that we needed to have a true conversation about it, because if you didn't have that type of intellectual conversation, understanding the terms, then it would be very difficult to see the other side. But this is the same argument that African Americans were saying for those hundreds of years. We're human beings, the laws have to change, we have to go through a protest in order to bring about a movement to bring about change. And for the viewing audience, many of those types of things are really good, but we still have a lot of covert racism that exists within our society that we still have to work on. And some of that covert is this invisible type of nature of it that might impact us disproportionately in health. Another issue is that of looking at incarceration rates. Dr. Chauncey McIntyre has a book entitled Criminalizing a Race, and she looked back in history at the time of enslavement, where they would catch people that did not have the papers, put them in jail, re-enslave them, and then make them go out and do work on the chain gang or on the railroads or on making bridges or in cutting pathways through for highways. All of that is entitled it Criminalizing a Race. So when you fast forward, we still see a disproportionate amount of proportions of African Americans that are incarcerated today. And this is a sad state of an emergency, but race is still so much a fundamental part of inequality that it causes the very environment that people live in to act out in deviant ways. And that's why I'm talking about that invisible nature of it. It's not that a mother has a child and says, I want them to be a drive-by shooter or a druggie, but the environment that still is present causes these types of behaviors to manifest themselves into a behavior. Presently, you can find that research is being done and looking at scores that people are making on a third grade school exam. And they are predicting that if that score is not high enough, that that's going to be a high potential of a person being in prison. And that score is disproportionately reflecting of the African American community again. So people are actually, that are wealthy, are investing in prison systems because they know there's going to be that need for this population that is out there.
You know, Doctor, when we talk about incarceration, and I think you mentioned the investments that folks are making in these private prisons, speak to that, because a large number of folks tend to believe that, and I think you mentioned that, that right this moment, that people are watching statistical information in reference to schools and et cetera, and looking and determining how many prisons that we might need, instead of thinking in terms of eliminating the number of prisons that we have here. That this is a market in a real sense for the prison system. Is that, do you see that from that perspective?
Yes, I think sociologically that is very clear. And I think when we look at social structure, you can ask yourself this fundamental question. Do you want to put, for a prisoner, maybe 30,000 or more a year, or should we gear an educational system or an economic system within infrastructures of environments and communities that would help that child be able to matriculate from the 1st through the 12th grade, then get a trade or go on to undergraduate school and then be a successful citizen? Or do we want to keep it as it is and then have this large prediction of that same subpopulation going into the prison system? And it seems like within the society in which we live in that this notion of keeping everything as it is the better way to go. But I think one of the solutions, as it's easy to talk about the problems, but the solution would be a better education system, have an economic infrastructure into low income and urban areas. For instance, if we look at the statistics in Chicago right now, it's just horrible at the high rates of deaths that go on. If we look at the statistics of the Iraq war at a certain time period for a couple of years and look at the same one in Chicago, the deaths are higher. So it's mind-boggling to see that. But now what can we do? This is African-American on African-American crime rates, and we need to go in and have some economic from that city to do something, as well as throughout the United States, as well as having a better educational system and families. Families must be a part of it, which is broken down.
You know, Dr. EKSanford, let me, over the last half minute that we have, thank you for the information that you've given us on part 2 of the status of race in America, because I think that it's out of this discussion, as well as other discussions, that people have a better understanding of what we must do and how we might be able to do it. And I want to thank you for that. And let me encourage our audience to tune in again next week for another informative edition of Comments. Thank you and good morning.